Today, let's talk about leveraging brands, and we'll talk about brand extensions. If you remember the previous lecture, it was on brand equity. Just remind you again, brand equity is the asset of the company that helps among your consumers' mind, that helps you take advantage of what the brand stands for, whether it's in terms of getting a price premium, whether it's in terms of getting accepted among your consumer segment, whether in terms of increasing awareness, recognition for the brand symbols, and so forth. We'll talk about brand extensions, and I'll show you a few examples of extensions about new products and services. Okay, so if you look at this, what brands do you see? I presume you'll see Coca-Cola written quite a few times, and then you'll see the Pepsi. The overall logo is the Pepsi. That's my small little work on Photoshop, if you will. So why do we see both? Why do we see both Coke and Pepsi? So the overall symbol, which is in psychology would be Gestalt principle. That is, you see things in whole. So if you look at the IBM logo, the IBM logo is not complete I, B, and M. They're separated by spaces, but still your mind sees it as a complete logo. So in this case, what you would probably see first is the reds and blues, which would probably cue you on Pepsi from all the brand equity that Pepsi's got with you, and Coca-Cola because of its name, its unique font, and so forth. On similar, so you, for example, take the Apple logo or the Windows logo with Apple embedded in it. Presumably, in both, the first thing that you'll see would be on the left or the Apple logo. You'll probably see Apple first, and then you'll see the Windows logos. On Windows, you'll probably see Windows first, and then you'll see the Apple logos. Just even though the Apple logos are multiple within the Windows logo, so your recognition first happens for the Gestalt, which is the whole, then it happens for the smaller parts. Here's another example, if you will, that I've tried with McDonald's and with Burger King, using McDonald's to build Burger King and Burger King to build McDonald's logo. So these unique shapes, these colors, the combinations help you recognize. And how you've been able to recognize all the ads and all the symbols that you've been seen over a period of time has led you to this. What's the average? The average that you see is you see two different stimuli for McDonald's every single day. So each person in the US sees two McDonald's symbols every single day. And think about what this would happen over a period of time in terms of you recognizing each one of these, whether it's a McDonald's outlet that you see with the golden arches, or whether you see it in the print form, whether you see it pop up when you're browsing a website, whatever it might be. And so that's all now stored in your schema or your memory as a unique shape, and each time I trigger that, right, it's called bottom-up processing, where a stimuli triggers your schema. The bottom-up stimuli triggers this, and instantly you start to feel lots of urges and so forth. An example of this would be, I think one theater tried to advertise the Coke's unique shape for about 20-25 milliseconds, would flicker on the screen, so you would not recognize it, but to trigger your schema, and instantly you would become thirsty. So they actually found that having this flickering screen with the Coke's logo on it made people thirsty, and they found that more people started drinking Coke. Okay, so a simple example. And so all of this taps into your brand equity. Here's another, maybe slightly more confusing for the Firefox, but easily perceivable for Explorer, just because Explorer is the simpler shape and form that you probably assimilated, and it's been for longer, so your brand recognition for that is easier. Okay, how do you brand yourself? Let's suppose one of the things that you want to think about your own self is there are particular symbols that you can trigger. So one of the symbols is probably your business card. Can you make it unique? Can you make it distinctive? Can you build on your particular brand? So here are some examples. So if you're trying to introduce yourself to someone, it would probably be, I find you attractive. Here's, thank you, have a nice day, would probably be a simple example. But here are a few. Here's one by a film crew that had a small little business card which actually had the clicker on it. So it's distinctive, so it builds on that. The next time you see that, you probably recognize the person, and the person could brand themselves. Here's one that was done for a toy chair manufacturer, where you could play around with the business card and actually make a toy chair out of it. Here's another for a personal business card that this person personalizes your various different websites and so forth. So you can play around with the various different things that the person provides to, and probably communicates personalization. Here's another Pilates company that basically it's a gym that also has provides Pilates, and you can play around with it. So there are various different ways that you can creatively brand yourself. The business card is one symbol of that, and then you can leverage it using brand extensions. Here are a few creative ways that outdoor ways that some companies have used. So if you think about how these brands have been recognized, it's not just because of advertising. Advertising happens in different forms, and more people have become creative because most people are tuning out to advertising right now. Here's one by an outdoor hoarding company for a salon, where a person who sits there actually seems as if the person has a major hairdo. Here's another that was done in Brazil just before the Soccer World Cup, where a bus station was converted to be a goaltending place. So it communicates, and a soda company leveraged that. And the distinctive colors of the green probably communicates that better. Here's one where you're trying to communicate how does it feel to be disabled. So a chair was instead of a chair, you had a wheelchair put there, and so a person sitting there would probably feel how the other person felt. And so here's another creative way to build a brand. This is outside IKEA's in Europe, one of their showrooms, so where the bus station was converted to a small little IKEA sofa and probably replicates some of the colors that they use and so forth, but communicates a little better on what IKEA stands for. When the MacBook Air was launched, here was how they launched it in certain places outside the retail outlets, and the bus station was converted to a MacBook Air Swing. Probably communicates that particular product's brand benefits much better. This was Coke's unique, if you will, the new grip can, where they were trying to advocate for the better grip on their packaging. So there's a slight little packaging advantage, but they wanted to build it in the brand. And so they had this small little gust of wind that would pull your coat. Humor does help in this process. So you think about McDonald's. So where can they go with their brand, and how can they extend the brand? Should they go in for onion rings, frozen onion rings, and should they sell it at Bashas' and other places? McDonald's is very, very strong among the kids segment with the toys that they promote and the various different brands that they co-promote, especially through movies and so forth. Should they go in for preschool toys? Would that be a good place to start for McDonald's? How about candy bars, which would be slightly far off, but given their distribution and they've been known for their quality. Would this be a place to go? Or how about photo processing, which would just be left field? Should they get into that, given that they can use the franchising model for that? Something to think about, okay? Some of which is much more closer and others are far out. And so this was a research that was done, and I'll point you to some of the research, the findings, and how you can find which kinds of brand extensions would be successful. I want to show you two different ads on at least one extension, and then we'll talk about a product category taking over another product category. And so those are not extensions, but just one product replacing another product. Okay, here's the first one. Let's talk about Starbucks.
Hi, I'm Susan Burfield, Associate Editor at Business Week. On September 29th, Starbucks launched Via, an instant coffee. This surprised a lot of people. Starbucks made a name for itself selling gourmet coffee and a coffee shop experience. But instant coffee is a $21 billion global market, and Starbucks wants a piece of it. Now, Howard Schultz knew that he was going to face a lot of skepticism. Chief among the skeptics were his own employees, the baristas in the stores who are going to have to sell Via. So ahead of the launch, Starbucks held pep rallies around the country. It had a lot of training for the baristas. It made sure they all tasted it ahead of time. And since the launch, Starbucks has really been pushing the baristas to sell Via to its regular customers. This has rankled some of the baristas and some of the customers too. And on the blogs that cover coffee and Starbucks, I read a lot of complaints from the baristas that they were being asked to push Via on customers that didn't want it, and that customers resented the baristas trying to sell them things that they may or may not want. In the end, Starbucks feels that they're going to convince people that there are uses for Via outside of the coffee store, obviously, even outside the home. But their main goal, I think, is to sell Via overseas. They'll do that next year, but meantime, in the U.S., Via will be available in decaf November 17th.
This is one of the extensions that Starbucks has done. I don't know if you've read the recent reports, but Starbucks is starting to introduce alcohol in some of their stores. So, for example, in 8 stores in California, now you can walk into Starbucks and get beer, for example. Are these baristas now becoming bartenders? So which kind of clientele is it bringing in? Starbucks is traditionally a morning kind of place that you hang out, and other times between meals. So is it going to replace that? So is it going to be more an evening place that people hang out? Are you going to start checking IDs? And so who's going to check these IDs? And are people going to stay longer? Is the crowd going to be different? So can people work that? Things for you to think about if this brand does get extended in that direction. Talking about international markets, Starbucks has converted an entire country from being a tea drinking country to becoming more of a coffee drinking country, Russia. In a span of about 5 to 6 years, Russia now drinks more coffee than it ever did, thanks to Starbucks. And so if you take this one extension, which is the instant coffee, Starbucks is trying to use the between visits, that is, a person visits the store, retail outlet, gets this, and they're more a service per place, and now you're trying to sell a commodity or a product, which is an instant coffee, which is going to be sold through a different channel, which is through your grocery stores. Starbucks is available through the grocery stores, so you can pick up your couple of their coffee beans. You can pick up, let's suppose, the frappuccinos from there in the chill form in a bottle. So all of those are still available. So they do have the distribution channel and the logistics for that. But is this another product that would add, or would it confuse people? Would it cannibalize sales, in the sense that basically are people going to then substitute their trips to the Starbucks closest retail store for instant coffee? Are you changing consumption from outside the home to inside the home, where people are looking to bring their Starbucks at home and then work on it and drink it at home? And where there's less effort outside the home, which is basically in a retail store, are you requiring them to put more effort inside the home? Are the quality perceptions going to differ? That is, one person's consumption of instant coffee with less or more water, less or more milk, or the amount of heat that you give, is the quality going to differ, right? And so is it going to hurt the brand? And Starbucks has changed its logo from being Starbucks coffee to becoming just Starbucks on their coffee cans. So those distinctive logos, do you lose out on that? That people are going to consume in their own mugs and not going to be exposed to these green symbols again and again. So what is it, and what does that mean for Starbucks? Lots and lots of issues with just one small little introduction. Okay, here's another product category per se, and we talk about smartphones. We talk about the fact that, and we've known that Kodak, for example, is on the verge of bankruptcy. Polaroid's already gone bust, and a couple of industries are going under with the smartphone introduction. And it's just a matter of time, I think, before the video game industry goes bust too. Sony, for example, has accumulated this year close to about $600 million of loss. And they've not introduced a successful introduction for the last few years, and PlayStation's not doing as well, thanks to iPhone, iPad, and all the video games that you see on those. So what does it mean? So should they extend elsewhere? Are these product categories being extended by smaller players, cheaper products? Here's an example. Just look at this.
This is hard, and I want you to know that I didn't expect this. I didn't see this coming, but I've reached a decision, and I think it's time that we break up. And I'm sure you probably want to know, why. And you deserve to know, and it's because I've met someone else. it's not that you're a bad camera. Actually, you're a very good camera. I mean, if I really want to be honest with myself, you're a better camera than the camera that's in my smartphone. But I've come to realize that things I used to think were important aren't as important anymore. You know, for starters, like sharing. You've never even really been that good at sharing, and I'm realizing that's something that's more important to me now. I mean, with my smartphone, I can send a photo as an email, I can send it as a MMS, I can post it to Facebook, all with just a couple of clicks. I mean, you've been really closed off. I think you'd have to admit that yourself. I mean, sometimes it's really hard to get things out of you. And then there's just, you know, experimentation and wanting to feel more free and adventurous. I mean, you know, with my smartphone, I've got these apps, and like they're really fun. They're easy to use. I can turn a photo into something that's black and white or sepia colored or like an old Polaroid. I mean, I don't know, maybe for you, going from like, you know, portrait mode to mountain mode to snow mode was really exciting, but I'll be honest, it wasn't really for me. And then I guess maybe the most important thing is, I mean, you're not always there. And I know that's hard to hear, but you're not. And my smartphone's always waiting. It's torture. I'm sorry. I don't, this probably makes me out to be like a jerk, and I don't mean to be, but I've come to realize these things now, and, well, I don't even really know what else to say. I guess I should probably just go. Yeah, I'm gonna go.
Probably a hilarious spoof by a New York Times journalist on how the entire point-and-shoot kinds of cameras that are standalones are dying because of an extension by the smartphone industry with just an app, correct? So meaning a small little extension, you're just adding more versatility to that particular product, and it wipes out an entire industry. So what happens to if it becomes successful to other products and others? And fall back, what's going to happen if, let's say, Kodak starts to enter the smartphone industry, and lots of, for example, GPS manufacturers have tried to enter the smartphone industry, tried to make their core proposition the most important thing. What if you start putting projectors on your smartphones? Does it affect, let's say, the personal selling business, and what's going to happen to them? Okay, something for you to think about. And let me point you to two pieces of research that have talked about what makes for a good extension, and how do you evaluate if an extension is going to be a success. And we'll talk about the same, McDonald's photo processing and the other examples that I gave you before. David Acker, who was at Berkeley then, and Kevin Lane Keller, who's a professor at Kellogg, both of them presented their paper in, I think it's the Journal of Marketing Research, or it could be the Journal of Consumer Research, was on consumer evaluation of brand extensions. So they actually got consumers to evaluate some of the ideas about each of these brands, and they tested for what would be the theoretical models that would predict if these would be a success or a failure. And they identified a few. So, for example, at that time in 1992, I think, when this paper was published, they looked at Heineken beer, they looked at Haagen-Dazs, they looked at Crest, they looked at McDonald's meals and so forth. They looked at 6 brands. And they asked these consumers, in this case, the results that I've provided for you are 107 undergraduate students, but they've also done it with actual consumers. And they asked these consumers to talk about the brands, and they quoted whatever the words were expressed when people were told Heineken beer. And so 44% of the people said that Heineken beer then was communicated, for example, some form of being expansive, was 24% high quality, and then they got people to rate it on a 1 to 7 scale, and Heineken beer in this case was rated 5.57. McDonald's meal was rated 3.33, and you can see that McDonald's, for example, has a mix of good attributes and bad attributes that are being mentioned. So McDonald's, for example, fast food and cheap and taste bad, and French fries, or good fries and greasy, right? So maybe good fries is a positive attribute, and greasy. You can imagine what would have happened if they'd done this research after Super Size Me, and subsequently after McDonald's introduced all its healthy meals and so forth. Maybe toys would come out as an important thing. California, for example, has banned toys given out to children along with McDonald's meals. So what happens if other states adopt the same? So let's take another example. Haagen-Dazs here, expansive seems to come out most. Then you have high calories, which is a negative attribute, comes out. So now how can you leverage these attributes that this brand has built over a period of time and transfer it to other extensions that the brand can potentially launch? And so that was their idea. So some of them have high quality to start with. So can they use the high quality, which is basically 5.57 Heineken's case and 3.33 in McDonald's case? Can they transfer that to their extension? So what they did was they asked for a bunch of different extensions for each of these brands. So look for the ones that I alluded to earlier, McDonald's photo processing, and Haagen-Dazs popcorn. How about that, right? Meaning, would that be a good idea? Or Crest chewing gum, which was subsequently launched and has been a success. At that point, Crest chewing gum didn't exist. And Crest not Crest chewing gum, but Crest mouthwash was subsequently launched and was a success. So Crest mouthwash and McDonald's frozen French fries. How about that? I alluded to frozen onion rings before, but what about frozen French fries? Would that be good? So they looked at this and they asked people to rate if this were a product that was available, what would be your attitude to extension on a 1 to 7 scale. And if somebody mentioned 2, that means that they didn't think it was a good idea. If they mentioned something close to 7, they thought it was a good idea. In this case, if you just look down the list, you'll probably see that some of them are 5.5. So Crest mouthwash, which 4.86 for Crest mouthwash. And for the sportswear for Walnut, right, I mean, that's about 5.15. So it seems like people seem to accept the idea and think that this extension would be a success. They also asked a few other scales, a few other variables that they've got measurements on. So they asked for the quality of the extension. So the quality of the parent brand, which is what we saw in the previous case. And so they thought the quality of the McDonald's photo processing would be 3.33. Heineken popcorn would be 5.57. So their extensions rating on a 1 to 7 scale, the quality perceptions would be less or more. And so as you can imagine, if McDonald's per se is seen as poor quality, the extensions also seen as poor quality. So anything associated with McDonald's, for example, photo processing, or the French fries, or what else would be there on that? The theme park. All of them are close to 3s. Whereas if you look at something else, let's say even Heineken popcorns, 5.57. Heineken wine, which seems like a closer category to the beer that they're selling, 5.57. So if you have poor quality perception to start with, maybe the extension doesn't gain much, and so you get poor perceptions of the brand extension as well. And so they ask consumers to also rate on how likely they're to be able to transfer the skills and the knowledge that they've gained from the parent brand's business to the brand extension and the proposition that you can have there. And so that they got that rating. They also asked if the extension was seen as a substitute for the parent brand. So for example, Heineken wine would probably be a substitute for beer, whereas theme park for McDonald's would not be a substitute. They also asked if it would be a complementary product. That means if these both could be consumed by the same person, maybe for different occasions, or at the same occasion, but let's say if the group, if they're buying it, if they're the purchaser, but somebody else is the user. And so they found that Haagen-Dazs, the cottage cheese, was probably not as good a complement, whereas the the Heineken wine would be a good complement for Heineken beer. That when you're consuming in different occasions, you probably consume wine and beer if you like the brand. And they also, the last thing that they asked was, how difficult do you think it's to manufacture and distribute the extension, the product? And they got those ratings. And then what they did was they ran a regression. So regression is basically where you're trying to find a relationship between variables that you think are independent on a dependent variable. So for example, you can think about price being an independent variable that influences people's purchase intent. So if the price goes up, purchase intent drops. So like that, they wanted to see quality transfer complementarity and the combination of that, which we'll call as the interaction. When quality increases within transferability, what happens, or quality increases within substitute. And they look to see if any of these made a difference. And so what I urge you to look at is a t-value, and the t-value is greater than 1.9. That means that it's going to be significant or an important attribute to consider. So in this case, they found the transferability. So they found the second attribute, which is the transferability, is an important one. That is, consumers need to be able to perceive that you can transfer whatever you gain from your parent brand to the extension, which seems intuitive. But what's probably less intuitive is that if it's complementary product, it's extremely good, but it's only good if you have high quality to start with. If it's substitutability product, it's important, but it's important only if you have a high quality to start with. It means Heineken is much more likely to gain from a complementary or substitute product as compared to McDonald's. And the last thing is, it should be a product category where it should be difficult to manufacture. So if let's say you get into a very simple product category, let's say you get into making branding paper, which is a commodity. That is, you buy paper from outside, you brand it, and you make it, you color it, and you sell it. Should McDonald's get into it? Would they have a distinct advantage having worked through their restaurants? Maybe not. And so people are likely to refuse that as an idea. Okay, so that was the first, in terms of so the takeaway from this is which kinds of categories can you extend to? Whatever category that you choose, if it's going to be, it should be, if it's close by, if it's a complementary product or a substitute product, you better make sure that you have high quality to start with. Second is, make sure that the product category that you choose, if you're high quality, also should be a difficult product category to make. Okay, so those are the takeaways from this. And what happens if you fail? So what happens? You extend. So Coke introduces Coke Zero, and let's say Pepsi comes up with Pepsi Next. Pepsi Next fails. What happens to the parent brand? Okay, what's the impact on that? Okay, so this was another paper that was done by Vanitha Swaminathan and her colleagues. And so what they found is it depends on a couple of things. It depends on whether you have loyal or non-loyal consumers for your parent brand. It also depends on whether the category, and we already talked about category similarity, whether it's a substitute or a complementary product, if it's similar or not similar. Okay, if it's similar, that is, the category similarity is high, and you have a successful brand extension, that means Coke Zero is extremely successful, then is Coke going to benefit from that? Coke's going to have some positive rub-offs on its non-loyal users. Maybe the people that are switching between Pepsi and Coke, maybe there's only a small proportion that switches, but that proportion, it's got to have a small little positive rub-off. Maybe it's prior non-users, maybe they're not non-loyal, that is, they're not switching back and forth, but they never use the product. Maybe it has a small little positive rub-off on those. Does it have on if Coke Zero, it's not called Coke Zero, but Coke is getting into, let's say, Coke Wine. Then what's happening is, even if they're successful Coke Wine, then all the non-loyal users, the people that have not used Coke, it just doesn't matter at all. But if you're unsuccessful, here's what happens. If you're unsuccessful, then let's say Coke Zero bombs, or for example Pepsi Next bombs, then what happens is, then your core users, your prior users of your parent brand, they feel the pinch, and so they're going to feel negative attributions, and so their attitude towards your parent brand is going to go down, and that's going to happen irrespective of whether it's Coke Zero, Coke Pepsi Next, or if it's Coke Wine further out. So I think there's if you take the analogy of a brand being like a rubber band, you can extend it as long. It's going to snap if you make a mistake. Okay, and lots of brands, and so Google, for example, right now is launching, is buying up lots of companies. So it's a fear that I have, that Google, for example, is overextending itself, and Sony, for example, is floundering. It's trying to find a way that it can launch a brand, launch a product that can help in its core TV and electronic section. What about BlackBerry? BlackBerry's core brand, the quality perception itself is low. So is it okay for them to start launching other kinds of products? Is it okay for them to, for example, get into TV screens or something of that sort? Something for you to think about, okay? What kinds of companies can get involved? So it's just a small little brief introduction. Hopefully I presented you with two research papers, one in terms of what criteria to use for brand extensions. The second is, if you're unsuccessful, who's it going to hurt? Okay, that's it for today. And here's one small extension that I know from personal experience. If you take, there's a pen again pen. Here's a pen where you put your fourth thumb into it. One of the extensions that they've been thinking about is what happens if this were, let's say, a lady's razor from a pen. Can they do it? And can they, for example, launch it at $8? Would it be successful or unsuccessful? Okay. And we'll talk about other things and how you can capitalize brand equity, how you can enhance your brand equity, and probably strengthen your competitive position using other techniques, maybe using trying to prevent competition from entering the market, or probably leveraging on one of the core strengths that some companies have, which is your distribution channel. That's it for today. Thank you, guys.